Hi, wider myth world. Here we are. Time for our first chance to get together for a Screenside Chat. We're going to see how these things work and whether this is something that you all would like us to do. My name's Peter Struck. You've met me on some of the video segments already, but we have our whole teaching team here to respond to some of the questions that have come up on the website. And I'd like to have now each of us to go around and introduce ourselves.
So my name is Carrie Mowbray. I'm part of the instructional and course design team for Coursera, and I'm a PhD here in classical studies at Penn.
I'm Caroline Whitbeck. I'm also a member of the instructional and course design team, and I'm a PhD candidate at Penn in comparative literature.
And I'm Kat Gillespie. I'm our final member of the instructional and course design team, also a PhD in classical studies here at Penn.
So we thought we'd jump into a bunch of questions that were coming up on the discussion forum. As you all know by now, this is the entire teaching team, and there are 50,000 of you all. So personal attention is, I'm afraid, not something that we're able to give. But what we have been doing is monitoring the discussion forums, weighing in as best we can, and in this forum try to get a few more answers to some of the great questions that are out there. A couple of things that have come up in these first couple of weeks. One thing that I learned is that fill in the blank, where you have to write the last name of the theorist, we need to be very cautious with. That's a format of question we plan not to use in future. So thank you, those of you who started to flag it. Thank you for your patience, those of you who continued to flag it. Had we been able to come up with a very clean solution without having to do something really dramatic, like totally scrap the quiz and make everyone take it over, we would have. But we saw very quickly that you all had figured out that there was that the system we use was not as forgiving as it should be, and that last name with a capital letter was required. Again, we'll avoid that in the future. If we had a clean way of doing it this time, we would have. Other questions that have come up around the quizzes, we're taking to heart, and I understand when there are sometimes moments where some wording could have been clarified. We'll think about it and we'll make adjustments as we can. But so far, I feel like I feel good about what we've been able to do with those quizzes, and I appreciate those of you that have been engaged with them. They're not meant to be something that's just absolutely rote, kind of click and forget kind of questions. It's made to make you think a little bit, and we'll do our level best to keep those things as clear, concise, straightforward as we can, in addition to having them be a chance for you all to think some higher level thoughts too. We'll be dropping 2 of the quizzes. That's built in, so if there have been bumps in the road in any of these for you all, we'll drop the lowest 2 grades. Any latecomers that have come into the class, you all know by now, it's been discussed on the forums, that applies to you all too, so you won't be penalized if you didn't get for not taking all the quizzes if you joined us late. Then also for the timing of the materials, of the release of the materials every week, there's been some question as to whether we could release them earlier than 1 week before the quizzes are due. We really can't, given the way the course moves, have the materials be released in a more with a longer lag time. We just get things would get all on top of the other things. So the pace that's required of the course really requires us to release things with a week's worth of time. So those are the kind of, there was one other question that we ran into of people who were asking, could we have the slides downloadable? In our version of a Coursera course, mostly what the slides are is copyrighted material, images that help us teach the course. And our copyrights for most of those pictures require that we use them in the way we're using them, not that we distribute them in downloadable format to everyone else. So that's where we are in terms of logistics. From there, I think we'll get to some questions, and our course team is going to have a conversation about some of the questions that you all have been raising on the forum.
Dr. Struck, I think I'd like to begin.
Okay.
There's been some chatter on the forums about this idea of universal laws, and we've gotten a couple of them so far. I'd like to know, where are these laws coming from, and how have they been kind of developed?
Yes, well, thank you for the question, Kat. It's a good question, and I wanted to make sure everyone understood. When I'm talking about universal laws, I'm talking about things that, according to me, Struck, these are things that I observe to be universally true across cultures. Now, I would always, I think, put universal in a kind of quotation mark way, because I myself am thrilled if I ever come across something that seems universal to me. In my own experience, it seems like there's always an exception everywhere. And in the humanities, we almost never find something that is truly universal. So when I'm teaching face-to-face in my Penn class, it's pretty easy for me to convey to everyone that I kind of have my tongue in my cheek a little bit when I'm talking about these universal laws. But this is exactly what I mean. I wouldn't waste your time if I didn't think they were really important. But the term universal is one that I use just to kind of try to catch people's attention. Maybe I could change the title to Strzok's Really Important Laws of Human Very General Kinds of Truths.
Now that does roll off the tongue.
Okay, yeah, so we could do it that way.
I think Strzok universal laws would work just fine in your circumscribed universe.
That's right.
Universe according to Strzok.
Right.
Okay, so my question is actually from Genevieve Higgs. So hi, Genevieve, if you're out there looking. This was actually part of a larger thread about repetitions. And I'll just read off her question. So I don't know if it counts as repetition in the same way, but it seems to me that these guys dedicate most of their time to being carnivores. I'm only in book 3, but the quantity of thigh bones and meat roasted on sticks and livestock slaughtered is overwhelming. It's like the plot goes something like, guy visits, meat and wine is consumed, they discuss stuff that happened 10 years ago. Is there some deeper meaning behind all of these barbecues that I'm missing?
That's a great question.
Homeric barbecues, take it away.
Well, I can start, but I think there's probably lots that we can say. The consumption of meat is a big deal. Eating of food is a way that people make social ties with one another, sharing a meal. And in a Greek context, sharing meat is the most expensive kind of meal you could share. And then there's even gradations of the meat. Pig meat is cheaper, cow meat is really expensive, and cow meat from beautiful ceremonial style cows is even more amazing. So yeah, the social connections here are being emphasized, and the way you express those through sharing of food is pivotal in the Odyssey. It shows up all the time, books 1 through 4, peppered by people sharing meals. And then to have meat be the centerpiece shows us that we're dealing with wealthy people in an aristocratic part of the society.
And of course, there's a sacrificial context as well, because one of the places that meat gets consumed is during and after sacrifice to the gods.
Right.
So that's a definite social sort of way to link members of the society, is by sharing a meal with each other and with the gods.
I've got one I would want to share with you all. This came in from, let's see, is it Andrew Luke? Is that correct? I think so.
Locke or Luke?
Luke. L-O-U-C-K-E. Andrew writes in, colors in the Odyssey, question on the translation. He talks about a thesis that's based on a study of the colors used in Homer, done by Gladstone, yes, the Prime Minister Gladstone, back in the 19th century. Essentially, the color blue wasn't supposed to occur in the Iliad and the Odyssey. I've come across blue a few times in the Odyssey so far, once at the end of Book 2, describing the waves, dark blue waves, and chalked it up to Fagles' translation. However, in Alcinous' palace, glazed blue as lapis shows up. That use of blue is highly specific, and it's hard to imagine a different color being used in this context, especially with lapis. Any insight? What was the original Greek? Great question, Andrew. Open that up to the team.
Well, I actually went and checked out the ancient Greek because I was curious about this as well. So I found that in the first example, the original Greek is kouanos, and this is the Greek word for lapis. And in the second example, that is actually porphyrios. Well, actually, those are switched. Sorry, the wave is porphyrios, and the glazed blue as lapis is kouanos, and that has to do with these kind of relative values of colors. So they're more, for the Greeks, they're more material or object oriented. So you have the material or the object, the thing in nature or the substance first, and then the color term is derived from that and starts being bandied around as something that people talk about, and that forms part of the vocabulary. And what we also have noticed is that the Greeks like to perceive of their colors in terms of values, shades, and hues. So you'll see a lot of terms for light versus dark. So for example, when we hear of flashing-eyed or gray-eyed Athena, that was a marker of difference because most people in the Greek world were dark-eyed. So when you have this person or goddess who has flashing light eyes, that's something that really stands out.
And the Porphyrios that you mentioned, that's another interesting connection. There'll be some out there that know of a famous dye in antiquity that is linked to this term, a purple dye, talking about a very dark color coming from seashells connected with the Phoenicians. And this purple color, very rich, very expensive kind of dye, is often connected with extreme wealth. So the Porphyrios as a description is talking about a dark purple connected with extreme wealth, and again connected to a physical object that has a very distinctive color. So
think about all the shells that were that would have to be mined for just a little bit of purple dye.
Yeah.
Great. So it sounds like what you're saying is color is both a marker of wealth and both a marker of are these people like me? Do they look like me? Do they value what I value?
I think that's fair enough. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair enough. The connections that we see in the characteristics that a group of ethnically affiliated people would share in their own coloring show up in these kind of valuations as well.
Great. Well, I'd like to turn the tables, if I may, to kind of another side of what we've been talking about a lot on the forums, and that is the role of the storyteller. So we've gotten a few of these stories from Demonicus. So is Demonicus having kind of playing the role that Homer, the actual poet or bard, would play, and is the fame that Demonicus within the Odyssey is kind of expecting through his story analogous to the kind of fame or kleos or reputation, etc., that we think that Homer might have expected to receive? Is there kind of a relationship between the poet inside and the poet out?
I like that question very much. It's a nice observation. Yes, indeed. Scholars have traditionally looked to Demonicus as Homer's own portrayal of what a poet's job's all about. He gives us an insight as to how poets functioned in society. Demonicus comes off looking pretty good. And yeah, I think it's a way for Homer to remind everyone, those bards are just all right. Wait till we see closing parts of the Odyssey, and there'll be important bards that show up also in closing books as all hell breaks loose in Odysseus's palace. There'll be some mercy that's directed especially to the bards, where mercy is mostly not directed to anybody. But yeah, I think that pointing to Demonicus as an encapsulation of what Homer thinks a poet is all about, and the linkage that Demonicus makes between what he's up to and kleos is really important. This is a Greek term that hasn't shown up in our lectures. It has shown up on the boards, though, interestingly. It's Kleos. We don't have our board behind us. That Greek term kleos means it's fame, but also much more than that. It's fame plus reputation, and it's a kind of cultural capital that really makes you who you are. Without it, there's really the individual sort of drains away if all the kleos is gone. You all are earning kleos out there on the discussion boards, and those of you who are getting hundreds of votes by your name, it's fame and glory. It's coming your way. So according to the Greeks, that would have made you well, I think in our class it makes you very important people. So that's a good thing.
And all over the world.
And all over the world.
50,000 plus people are hearing your name.
Yeah.
Heather and Genevieve and others.
That's right.
And not to ruin your spoiler, Peter, we do see this bard who is the possible recipient of an act of mercy at the end. We've met him very early on. His name is Phemius. And one of the first acts, you could argue, that Telemachus makes the first stride towards coming into his own is when Penelope comes down and hears the song that Phemius is playing and says, "Oh no, I'm gonna take to my room. This is all too sad." And he says, "No, this is what we need to listen to. And you can go and separate yourself, but he should play this song, and we should understand the values in this song." And coming out of that, Kat, I have a really interesting question I wanted to mention from Angeliki A. Patelli, who also looked at Demonicus's song and saw some parallels. Her post was about the parallels of Aphrodite, Ares, and Hephaestus in Demonicus' song as possibly relating to Penelope, the suitors, and Odysseus. So, and Angeliki writes, While reading this part of Book 8 and after listening to the lecture about the various ways the story of Demodocus was translated by the commentators, it occurred to me that this part of the Odyssey, the bard's song about the divine adultery, was not, in fact, irrelevant to the main story. Odysseus' return to Ithaca, and therefore to his house, wife, and bed, is a crucial part of the Odyssey. What if the bard's song, used as an analogy concerning the hero's possible fears, that while he was away, someone else could have taken his place, seducing his wife? So what do we agree with this? It's a very interesting idea here.
Yeah. I think it's a nice reading. Looking for ways in which that slightly off-color, ribald little riff that Demodocus goes on, looking for connections within the larger frame of the Odyssey is something that sometimes people just don't bother to do. They run across this thing, it seems sort of weird, the gods are laughing at each other, what's this all about? I went through some of what the ancient commentators made of it. They kind of pried it out of the context of the Odyssey as a whole and interpreted it as a meditation on other kinds of themes. But yeah, I think that it's fair enough to say that this theme of adultery leading to terrible humiliation is something that I think fits into a larger theme that we're going to visit in real sharp detail in the closing books of the Odyssey with Odysseus and Penelope. So yeah, I like the comment very much.
All right. Well, to change focus a little bit again, I'd actually like to talk a little bit about Telemachus. He is kind of the one who is left out of these love triangles, if you call them. He's the kind of Orestes figure who is not part of that adulterous relationship between his mother, his father, and her lover. But my question is more about Telemachus as someone who is maturing. And this comes from Jayashri Anand, and she suggests that the idea of Telemachus requiring an education on how to respond to his situation is very interesting. She realized that when you're talking about culturation as one of these central ideas, that how many of our reactions or responses to situations we face on a daily basis are a result of emulation. That is, how are we shaped by responses of our elders or other role models. These could be, of course, our peers, our elders, actually, or other public figures that we admire. So who are, aside from, of course, mentor, who are kind of Telemachus's sorts of role models, and what kinds of lessons do they give him? Do we see an actual maturation of Telemachus, or does he have really far to go once we get to the end of this epic?
That's a great question, and I'd love to hear what you all think of it, too. On the couple things I'd just start with, it's generally not the case that in ancient epics people grow and learn and change. That's a standard piece of contemporary novels, Bildungsroman roman and forward. So from the Romantic period, especially in forward, we have standard things that happen where a character goes through transformative experience and now becomes someone new, emerges into a whole different kind of consciousness or through a learning experience. Generally what happens in ancient epic, and this is true with Odysseus, they go through all kinds of awful things and then they're done and thank goodness it's over. And Odysseus surely in his journey acquires knowledge, and he has a depth of experience that is richer and all those kind of things, but it's not like he's a different person at the end. He's just more him than he was when he started, but he's still him. Telemachus, though, I think causes us to nuance this picture a little bit. He does quite a bit. He does show change. He is immature at the beginning, and he becomes much more mature by the end. So I think that the ancient storytellers are not tone deaf to this kind of thing in a person's life, and Telemachus gives us a way into it. He starts off in a way that he feels sorry for himself. He's ineffectual. The fact that he cries doesn't separate him from other heroes. Lots of men cry in these Greek stories. Achilles, the greatest macho warrior of all time, cries a lot. Crying is not a problem for them, but the fact that he cries when he feels sorry for himself, that's probably not that's not so heroic. And he's ineffectual and powerless. All these things show him as being a younger person. Now, later on in the epic, he'll start to say things that show him growing up and coming into his own, taking responsibility for things, taking on other people's problems and other people's burdens. That's a sign of growing up. And at a certain point, he himself declares and says, I'm no longer a boy, I'm a man. We're going to see that happen in the story. So Telemachus is indeed going through a kind of process where he's changing, and that's noteworthy in this story, and I think it does help us enrich the picture of people as they grow up. Another thread in that question was, is there an acculturation that's happening with Telemachus? And I suggested that in one of the lectures, that in what his experience with these others as he's going around at the beginning of the story, he's really learning how to respond emotionally to what's happening in his palace. When bad things happen, there's a lot of ways to respond. A hero responds with anger. And Telemachus is being schooled. Everyone's showing him, aren't you angry? And Telemachus clearly isn't angry. He feels sad, and it's pathetic. It's all these sad things, but anger, well, it's not quite there. By the end, he's angry. And it's as though this learning experience of learning how to emotionally respond has been now built into him and had become a part of him. So I think even things that we consider as just totally natural, for example, your emotional response to something, actually probably has a pretty rich and deep cultural perspective to it too. And I think Homer is helping us develop that line of thinking here in the cultural maturing that Telemachus is engaged in.
Great. I guess building a little off that, or I guess my initial responses today, we got a lot of these kind of obvious sorts of models, Menelaus and Nestor, etc., in the first few books, but given this kind of forum, and now that the question is out there, I would ask students to kind of look for more subtle ways and subtle, specifically maybe non-nobles, people of other classes or other sorts of situations, say Euryclea, who we're going to meet soon, or other servants, how these more different kinds of figures can add nuance to that very obvious sort of grow up boy message that Telemachus gets in his initial journeys. And I would wonder how we can further that discussion as we go on.
Yeah.
Well, and speaking of him going and gaining this experiential knowledge, some of which includes cultural knowledge, as he's traveling, one thing he really learns how to do in his journeys is to learn how to be a good host as well as a good guest. I mean, he learns how to be a host more on Ithaca, but then when the tables are turned and he has to go out into the wider world and there aren't any Holiday Inns or Best Westerns out there, he has to really rely on the people that he meets and whose guests he is. And of course that's part of Xenia that we've talked about, and it's this reciprocal relationship that has to do with being a guest and a host, and how you treat people to whom you're beholden and people who are beholden to you.
And that's what's so interesting about when we first meet him, is that he's in a very weird liminal position. It is his house, and yet he is not occupying it in full. He is not the suitors, he's not the guests, but he's also not in control. So it'll be about resolving those categories for him. May I ask one more question?
Yeah.
I think this has to do with the ideas of culture that we've been raising about Telemachus, now looking to our man Odysseus here. I thought this was a really wonderful question that Barbara Daniels asked. She said, why do we have both wild and well-bred olives being used for Odysseus's bed? So this is again when he washes up in Scheria, and he creeps to that middle area that's between the shore and the forest, and he makes a bed under olive trees, one wild, the other not. Quote, both sprung from the same root. Is there any significance, Barbara asks, that both the wild and the cultivated trees are being used? I think that's a really great close reading, so thank you. I want to open that up to you guys.
I think that's a great question, and I can only scratch the surface in trying to suggest a couple of answers. I don't know of a lot of detailed scholarly work that's been done on this. It's likely that some has. I just am not aware of it myself. If you all could dig into it and find some more and get back on the discussion board, we'll advance the conversation that way. In my own view, I think that as I've worked on that line myself, the combination there of wildness and well-bredness seems to be what Homer's getting at, that you need both of these kind of capacities, both of these kind of qualities. A civilized, cultured set of skills that's necessary, and also a certain wildness is something that's also necessary. The kind of energy and power and just life force that's necessary to get through all of the kind of challenges that Odysseus has, I think are being reflected in the kind of shelter he finds from something that is both wild and also well-bred. I think those two things come together to say each of them is going to have its place for him in overcoming what he's already overcome, but soon enough in the book we're going to learn what it is that he's overcome.
Well, it's also something that, not to give too many spoilers, a little bit of a spoiler alert, but the domestic sphere and context of the olive tree. This is something that foreshadows something that will show up toward the very end of the Odyssey. So keep an eye on these olive trees, and especially the civilized and domestic context, and how they can become nurturing and something familiar and very home-like for Odysseus.
Well, it's also the position that Odysseus is exactly in. He's this noble, but he's washed up on a shore. He looks exactly like the wild olive, if we want to say that. He's covered in leaves and dirt and etc.
It's well camouflaged.
Right. But it's also, the olive is this gift of Athena, right? And we've talked a little bit about how Athena is kind of watching over our heroes within the epic. So I think it's really significant that it is an olive rather than a laurel or any other sort of vegetation.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. I think that's well chosen by Homer and well read from the question that came from the group. So thanks all. Good. So, good time, I think, for us to wrap up, and we'll come back and visit you another time as the course goes on. We just thought it would be a good time to check in and see if there are some ways for us to let you all know that we're keeping some tabs on the great things that are coming to us on those boards. So just keep them coming. And keep up with your reading, don't forget. There's a lot of work in the class, we know, but I hope it will be absolutely well worth your while. As I said at the beginning, I feel pretty confident that we've got a talented teaching team around the table, but I know for sure that we've got some of the smartest minds ever to live who are producing those things that you're reading. You're going to be in the company of greats, definitely there. We'll do our best on our side to keep up our part of the bargain too. So thanks very much for being a part of the course, and we'll see you again in this context and see you more on the videos as they come available online. So good luck with the reading, everybody, and have a good rest of the week.
All right, take care, everyone.